Welcome to New View Advice with Amanda DeRocher. Hey, beautiful soul. Welcome to New View Advice. If you're new here, this is a healing-centered advice podcast where I offer guidance for the healing journey. I do not believe I have all the answers you seek. I believe you have all the answers. You just may need a new view and a little help along the way. Thank you for joining me for today's episode. Today we're discussing burnout. I think burnout is something many people experience. I know I've gone through burnout recently, so has my partner, Evan. So this question felt very relevant for me, and I know many people can relate to burnout. Today we're going to discuss burnout, what some symptoms of burnout are in case you're questioning if you're burnt out. But we're also going to talk about what do we do about burnout? How do we actually recover from feeling drained? What I think can happen with burnout is it can be prolonged because we don't actually allow ourselves to recover. And so we're going to talk a bit about that. We're also going to talk about the question, how do we tell the difference between needing a break from our job and knowing when we need to walk away for good? So my intention is to help you to slow down, begin to reflect on what you truly need, and to help you feel intentional about your next step forward. So before I jump into today's episode, I always like to mention that if you haven't already, I invite you to check out newviewadvice.com. On New View Advice, we have blog posts, podcast episodes, I have poems, we have meditations, we have lots of resources for the healing journey, so you can check that out after this episode. Also, the episode show notes for this episode will be at newviewadvice.com/138, and I'll have some resources listed there to assist you. Also, I did some research before this episode, and I'll have some links at the show notes at newviewadvice.com/138. So you can check that out after this episode. But with that, let's jump on into talking about burnout. Dear Amanda, I'm currently battling some major burnout at work, and it's starting to turn into me being super annoyed, a bit short and snippy, and overly critical of our operations. Anytime I've ever felt like this at a job, I've just gone ahead and found a new one, but I don't think I'm truly ready to jump ship yet. I've started putting feelers out and I had an interview, but leading up to that interview, I had a severe gut reaction that something is holding me back from committing to that next career move. I typically trust my gut intuition, so having that negative feeling about pursuing another job is giving me pause. But if I'm going to stay at my job, I truthfully have no skill set to recover from burnout besides quitting, taking a month off to travel and reset, and then diving into a new job. How do I begin to recover from this burnout without doing what I know best? Or how do I know when it's time to jump ship and take my career to the next move? Thank you so much for this question. I am so sorry you feel burnt out. I think feeling burnt out is such a bummer. I know that's such an odd way to put it, but honestly, I have felt burnt out this year and it's so discouraging. That's how I find it. It's hard to overcome because it's not just needing physical rest. Burnout is truly emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion. It's being completely depleted and it's needing a full reset when we allow ourselves to be fully burnt out, which is very common. Especially in America, at least I feel like people get burnt out all the time. And as I mentioned, I felt burnt out this year. So has my partner, Evan, and it can be hard to navigate. So I just want to say, I'm sorry that you're currently navigating this. And also, you are not alone. And this is such a great question because honestly, I felt like it was really relevant to my life to reflect on this as well. So thank you for asking this. So for anybody who may be listening and be wondering if they're burnt out, I did want to talk a bit about what burnout is. So burnout is when we are exhausted emotionally, mentally, and physically, and it's caused by being overly stressed for too long. And burnout often points to something needs to change, and that could be the environment itself. So as you mentioned, it could be that you need to leave this job because the environment is unsustainable, or it could be a mental mindset even needs to change. Maybe you need to start setting boundaries. Maybe you need to prioritize rest or self-care. It's going to be different for everybody, but burnout to me is a sign that something needs to change because the way we are living is unsustainable. We are unable to keep going the way we are. It's a way our body can communicate to us that something needs to change. And oftentimes before we're burnt out, there's stress signs, right? So we begin to notice that we're stressed or we begin to have less and less energy, but many times we continue to power through, and burnout is that way that I feel like our body tells us enough, like you're done, you need to listen, you need to rest. And so some signs of burnout can include fatigue, apathy. That's a big one for me. When I begin to feel apathetic in my life, that is a sign I am burnt out. And that includes loss of purpose, feeling like a loss of meaning for your life, loss of motivation, self-doubt. Burnout can also lead to depression, irritability, cynicism, headaches, stomach aches, detachment, or social withdrawal or beginning to isolate. So those are some signs of burnout in case you were questioning if you are feeling burnt out. But now I want to talk about how do we begin to recover when we feel completely drained, when we feel burnt out. And the first thing is to rest. It's to prioritize self-care. So you want to find ways to take a break from work without having to quit altogether. I think because you aren't sure on if you want to quit or stay at your job, it's important to start implementing small moments of self care. So maybe that's turning all electronics off at a certain hour. I find that we are an overstimulated society, at least here in America. And so finding ways to decrease stimulus is a way to help with feeling stressed all the time, especially if you're in front of a computer all day. I think so many people go home and they continue to be on a computer or they continue to be on their phone or watch TV. Finding ways to turn off electronics can be really helpful when recovering from burnout. I think that when we do that, we're slowing down and then we can kind of hear ourselves think a bit more. I think turning off electronics can be super helpful. Setting boundaries with your work can be a good first step. That could be the step you honestly need. Some people may just need to start setting more boundaries at work. That is a reason that can lead to burnout if you don't have good boundaries. Boundaries are there to help us to protect our energy. I think some people view boundaries as keeping things out. I like to view boundaries as keeping the good stuff in. So we want to create boundaries in order to protect our sanity, to protect our happiness, to protect our peace. And so you may just need to start setting boundaries, and that could be turning your phone off at a certain time. I know for some people, that's even a really hard step. Like Evan works in finance, and we have to talk about how, like, at a certain hour, he's allowed to turn his phone off. He would disagree with me, though. So there's that. But I do think that for a lot of people, starting to set those boundaries around just not checking your phone can be helpful. I know for me, sometimes I can become a little obsessive with checking electronic things like emails and numbers and things like that. And when I begin to disconnect from that and pull away from that, my body begins to relax. It can just be overwhelming to always be on call, to always feel like you have to respond. And that's why I turn my phone off a lot of times. I'm really slow to respond to even text messages because I'm a big believer that we don't always need to be accessible. And you may be in a job where they tell you do always have to be accessible. And maybe that's something you have to decide if you can do that. Because let me promise you, there are jobs where you don't always have to be accessible. So that could be a reason for your burnout. But that is part of the rest and recovery phase. I think when we are burnt out, the first thing is just to prioritize resting and to slow down and to step away from the things that are causing the burnout. So that's a question you want to ask yourself is what is causing the most burnout? And that leads me to, is it the work itself? Is it the environment? Is it the people? Is it something in your personal life? Is it a relationship in your personal life? But what is causing the burnout? And if it's the work itself, that's something to think about. But I wanted to talk a bit about if it's the people in your work environment, because that goes back to the boundaries, maybe needing to set boundaries at work. But I wanted to talk a bit about relationships because I think that people who are empathetic, really empathetic, overly empathetic, and people who are people pleasers can really suffer from burnout. And it doesn't even do with the work itself, it does with the emotional toll they are taking at work. Because overly empathetic people sometimes take on the stress of others. And if you are in a high stress environment and you're overly empathetic and you're empathizing with everybody else's stress and you're having your own stress, of course, it's going to lead to burnout. So it's really important for you to become aware if you are over empathizing in your work environment and if that is causing you stress. So say you have a coworker who's going through a really hard time and you know that and you feel bad because on the surface, it looks like their life is harder than your life. And you feel like, oh, let me take on some things for this person because I know they're stressed. I know they're going through a lot. But now you're burnt out. That's not helping anybody. That's not helping your work. That's not helping them. And that's especially not helping you because at the end of the day, your responsibility is to help yourself. And we truly cannot help other people unless we are helping ourselves. We view it as a cup. We help ourselves by filling up our own cup first, and then we can help others with the overflow. As someone, me, who does a business where I answer listener questions, where I help people on their healing journeys, I've definitely had to learn balance with what I do because at the end of the day, I can't sit here and answer a question truthfully and compassionately if I'm not in a good place. I need to feel balanced in order to do my work to the best of my ability. And through doing this podcast for years, I have learned the importance of that. And I have learned that I can only show up in integrity if I am taking care of me first. That is so important for everything I do. And I believe that's really true for everybody. And so you can really only show up as your best version of yourself at work if you're taking care of you first. And so for my people pleasers and my over empathizers out there, it's so important that even if somebody else is struggling, that you honor yourself at your job and you put yourself, your mental health, and your well-being before your coworkers, before your boss, before your job. because you're not going to be able to show up in integrity and you're not going to show up to the best of your ability if you're out of balance, right? That's another big part with burnout is it's about coming back into balance. And that's why I question your quit, go on vacation, and then start this cycle all over again, is that I'm wondering if a part of you is looking for balance. It's looking for you to learn how to do all this in balance. I always view balance like the infinity symbol. We want everything to flow back and forth, whatever that may be. But when we are burnt out, we are so out of balance that's why the rest and recovery phase is first when it comes to burnout, because we need to find a way to come back into balance. We want to come into balance emotionally, mentally, and physically. Because so often when we feel burnt out, we get to the point where we're feeling physical symptoms like stress headaches, jaw clenching. When I'm feeling burnt out, I'm clenching my jaw. And I have been working really hard to not be a jaw clencher anymore. But I know I'm stressed if I am suffering from clenching headaches and if my jaw hurts. That's how I know I'm in stress response, is if I am clenching. It's like my body's way of telling me, Amanda, you are stressed. So to quickly go back, I want to mention the people pleasing and the over empathizing, because that's so important to know about yourself, because that will continue to follow you into all your work environments. So that's why that's one to pay attention to. If it's people pleasing or over empathizing in your work environment is leading to burnout, because that will continue to follow you throughout any job you take, because that doesn't do with the job itself. So that's important to notice. Also, it could be the relationships, and it could just be that you work with a really difficult person and then you may have to leave your job. Some people are just straight up difficult. Ev and I have both worked in jobs where it's like you work with somebody who it's like, it's that person and that person's vibe and that person's bad attitude and that person's often yelling, which is crazy to me that people think it's okay to yell at other adults, but we're not going to do that today because that's not today's question. But if you work with somebody who just screams in the office, that will impact the entire office, and that will lead to stress, and that will lead to burnout. Oh, that leads me to, if you work with somebody who makes you feel unsafe. So if you go to work every day and you don't feel safe, you are going to one day feel burnt out, because safety is required for that balance. When do we feel balanced? When we feel safe. So if we don't feel safe, we're going to feel unbalanced. And so safety and security and stability are required for us to not live in stress response. But we will always be stressed if we work with somebody who makes us feel unsafe. And if you work with somebody who's toxic and yells all the time, somebody who uses manipulative behavior, or somebody who's just straight up rude all the time, I feel like we all know who those people are. That will lead to burnout. Doesn't mean you have to quit your job. Maybe there's ways around working with that person. But many times there isn't. Many times it's the person in charge. Many times it's the leader creating an environment that doesn't feel safe for people and where everybody's walking on eggshells. If you're in any environment that leads you walking on eggshells, again, you will feel burnt out. I have been in relationships where I felt like I was walking on eggshells. So I was always stressed because I was always trying to predict this other person's actions because I was so nervous about setting them off. Of course, you're going to feel burnt out. Of course. So understanding that other people's behaviors could lead to burnout, and understanding if your behaviors with others is leading to your burnout, super important when reflecting on burnout. So I wanted to talk a bit about that. So when recovering from burnout, we're going to pause, we're going to rest, we're going to recover, we're going to reflect. And part of that reflecting is what is causing the burnout. I have a few other questions I wanted to list for reflecting on burnout, because I believe that when we are burnt out, there is an uncomfortable truth, a hard truth we want to see, and we need to be honest with ourselves about that hard truth, because something does need to change. That is what burnout is telling us. It is always telling us something needs to change. That is a truth. So if you're feeling burnt out, something in your life needs to change. So here are some questions you can ask yourself to reflect on your own personal burnout. So as we've talked about, one is, what is causing the burnout? Is it the people you work with? Is it the work you're doing? Is it the hours? The second question would be, what does burnout feel like in the body? I believe that the answers to these questions live in your body. And that's why we need to pause, rest, recover, disconnect from technology, because that is something that keeps us in stress response, keeps us overstimulated, and it is a way we distract ourselves from our own truth. If you are struggling with what is causing your burnout, begin to become really aware of, what does burnout feel like in your body? And the more awareness you bring to that, the more you will notice the moments when you feel the most burnt out. Is there a certain person who walks by your office and they peek their head in that then you all of a sudden notice, oh my God, I have that heavy feeling in my chest. Oh my God, I have a headache. Or is it a certain type of task you do? Maybe you're doing a lot of administrative tasks that lead you burnt out and maybe you need more help. Or maybe you feel really burnt out when you're in meetings with a certain client. It's beginning to notice what that burnout feels like in your body, specifically if you don't know what is actually causing the burnout. Because so many times we go, oh, it's the job as a whole. And it likely is parts of the job, like I said. It's likely the people, the work itself. Maybe you feel unfulfilled at it, but you want to notice what is leading to the burnout. Other questions you can ask yourself are, what are your values? We talked about values last week, but I have a values list on my website at newviewadvice.com, and it'll be at newviewadvice.com/138. And knowing your values will help you to know if this job is aligned or not. So I mentioned last week, I believe it's really important for us to know our values. And I think if we pick 3 to 5 values, it's a way to create a guiding light for our life. It's almost like a lighthouse, like it points us in the right direction because we're aligned with our values. And the great thing about values is everybody can have different values. So our values are different than other people's, but that's okay. There's no problem with that. We each get to choose our values. So for me, my values right now are compassion, truth, and freedom. And what I've noticed is when I make decisions that aren't aligned with my values, it leads to burnout pretty quickly for me at this point because so many of my choices are aligned with my values that when I misalign or when I don't align with my values, it becomes very clear internally for me. And for me, it often leads to apathy. And I want to take a minute to talk about apathy, but I'm going to finish this questions list first, and then we'll talk about apathy. A great way for you to be intentional about this job and your next job is to know your values. And also with that, you can ask yourself what excites you. So are there any parts of this job that still excite you? And if not, what brings you that sense of meaning, that sense of purpose? Because maybe this job isn't aligned with your purpose. It's another way we can align our life is to be really purposeful. Like, what is our purpose? That's a question I struggle with. And ChatGPT said the most common question asked, because I asked it, what is the most common question that people ask you? The question people ask the most is, what is the meaning of life? And some sort of version of what is my purpose? How do I find my purpose? So I wanted to mention that here because if you don't know your purpose, clearly most people don't because everybody is asking ChatGPT that exact question. And so don't put pressure on yourself if you don't know the answers to these questions, but it's important to begin asking yourself them because you can begin to know even what isn't your purpose. Sometimes I don't know the answers to things, but I begin to know what isn't the answer. And that can be just as helpful as knowing what the answer to our question is, if that makes sense, right? So what is my purpose? Knowing what isn't my purpose is just as helpful as knowing what is my purpose. So ways you can ask yourself is this, what excites you? So say you say traveling excites me. What is it about traveling? Who are you when you travel? How do you feel when you travel? And are you able to bring any parts of that version of yourself more and more into your day-to-day life? So personally, I'm somebody who also loves to travel. And I always tell my therapist that I'm a great vacationer. I think I'm so great on vacation. I struggle still in my day-to-day life. Who doesn't? But I'm like, I'm like a rock star on vacation. It's because I'm able to give up all responsibility on vacation. That's one thing. I'm able to de-stress because I'm able to turn off all electronics and not worry about anything. I also know there's a time limit on it. So when I've traveled open-endedly, that's been tougher for me than knowing like, oh, I have like 3 days to relax. But what I love about vacation, Amanda, is that she's so present. She's able to just be present with what is, and she's able to relax and she trusts, right? I'm in a state of trust when I'm relaxing. And when I vacation and when I travel, I'm pretty open-ended with my itinerary and I just kind of go with the flow. I can be really controlling in my day-to-day life, like super controlling. And I bring that up because it's a thing I try to remind myself all the time is, how can I be more present? I love what it feels like when I'm present. I love what it feels like when I'm trusting. I love what it feels like when I'm relaxed. How can I bring more of that into my day-to-day life instead of always needing a full reset? Because as great as it is for me to feel burnt out and then go travel or go on vacation, if I keep repeating the cycle, which I have in my life, I need to ask myself, what can I do to not need this vacation? Because what I'm finding is that the more I get burnt out, the harder it is to recover and the longer it takes to recover because I think my body isn't ever fully recovering because I'm not actually understanding what's causing my burnout. And I will say here that through my own reflection, what was causing my burnout was control, was trying to control everything and being really controlling and not being trusting, as I mentioned, with my work and with my path and with new view advice. What leads me to burnout is control. When I try to be way too controlling and I try to do way too much and I'm not open to help, and when I just try to control everything and I don't just let go, leads to burnout. And I think that's true for other people too. That's why I wanted to mention that here, that sometimes we just need to ask for help, or sometimes we need to trust that we don't have to do everything perfectly, because perfectionists also tend to find they get burnt out because you can't be perfect all the time. We were never meant to be perfect. We were never meant to be super controlling. It's not really how we function as humans because we're not a perfect species. So that can lead to burnout. So with you knowing that that job wasn't the right answer, with other questions you could reflect on, I'd ask you if you're being too controlling at any places in your job, or if you suffer from perfectionist tendencies and what you could do to maybe let go more in your life. Two more questions I want to mention are: one, when you sit in silence and stillness, again, I'm just going to hone in, not with a phone, allow yourself to be technology free. You can ask yourself, has this job taught me everything that there is to learn? Or is there another lesson I could learn here? This is basically asking yourself, is there still growth that can happen for me here? Because that can lead to burnout as well when we're not growing anymore. And the last question I had is, in an ideal world, what would your daily life look like? Are there any ways to bring even a small bit of that into your life today? And so those are some questions you could do when reflecting. But as I mentioned, I think when we hit cycles of burnout, it's that there's a deeper change that needs to be made. So for you, it could be that you need to leave this job and you need to make another change. And again, that change could be boundaries. It could be not over empathizing. It could be letting go of control. It could be asking for help. It could be prioritizing yourself. But burnout is a sign that the foundation is broken. In order to build a house that's secure, we need to fix the foundation. And so burnout is just a sign that there's a crack in that foundation. And so the last thing I want to talk about in this episode is that I think that many times when we feel burnt out, we feel apathetic with life. And apathy is feeling indifferent. It's a lack of feeling. It's like not allowing yourself to feel. You begin to detach from life. You begin to detach from your feelings. You begin to just detach in general. And that can lead to a sense of numbness. And apathy is, I think, a way people cope with discomfort because it's easier not to feel anything than to feel something difficult. But the dangers of apathy and the dangers of indifference are that when we feel apathetic, we're not allowing ourselves to feel the good or the bad. And so for me, when I feel apathetic, it's a sign that something's off in my life because I really believe that in order for us to feel alive and to feel truly free and to feel that excitement that life can bring and to feel joy and all those good feelings, we have to feel the hard ones and we cannot lean into apathy. I see apathy as a bit of a disease within our society. Maybe that's extreme. I don't care. I see a dangerous amount of indifference in today's world. And I believe indifference and apathy are huge problems. And I mention that here because I think that it's just important for us to know it's okay to feel our feelings. If you're new here, welcome to New View Advices, where we feel all our feelings. All of them, the full spectrum. That is what it is to be human. You feel all the feelings. There's nothing wrong with your feelings. Your feelings are information, they are telling you things. And so you mentioned in your question, you might not be feeling apathetic. You mentioned feeling a bit cynical and feeling irritated and snippy. Those are actually really good indicators. Like pay attention to when you're exactly feeling those things. It sounds like it's with your coworkers. And so that's why I think maybe paying attention to the relationships at your work and if there's boundaries needed or if you need to leave the environment, but being intentional about what is causing those feelings you described. But I'm glad you're feeling feelings. Those are incredible indicators I think oftentimes we feel those type of feelings, and then when they're too uncomfortable, we tend to then feel apathetic because we don't even want to feel that way. But apathy, I think, is a form of numbness. It's turning off the feelings and it's just disconnecting from life. And the truth is, we deserve to feel connected to life. That's where we get to feel the sense of meaning, the purpose. It's where life lives. It's where we get to really feel alive. Like, that's just the word that keeps coming up. And so when we feel burnt out, it's a sign to stop, rest, recover, and find what can get us back on track to feeling alive again. Anyways, I just wanted to mention that before I wrapped up this episode. But I just want to say before I close out this episode that it sounds like you're in an in-between phase. And when we are in the in-between, it is always uncomfortable. But it sounds to me like your body and your soul are asking you to just go slow with this. It's not asking you to jump ship. Like you said, how do you know when to jump ship? You will know when to jump ship. And your body and your soul are just asking you to be a little slower with this, a little more intentional. Maybe you need to understand the burnout more, or maybe you need to align with your values, or maybe you just need to take a moment to just accept that maybe this chapter is over, or maybe you need to accept that it's not time to leave. But you're in the in between, which is just always uncomfortable, but it's part of life. It's part of the cycles we go through. In order for the new to have anything new come, you have to go through the discomfort before the new. I find that in my life. Currently, I'm leaning into some new creative projects, which I'm super excited about. But before that, I was feeling burnt out. I went through a spring that I have some regrets, I'll be honest. I have regrets. I felt burnt out, and I learned a lot. But then I had to go into the recovery phase because I made some choices that, like I said, I regret. But the important thing about regret is to learn from our regrets. We can't change the past, but we can learn from the choices that we realize weren't best for us. And so I had to take a long time. I had to take longer than I'd like to admit to recover from the spring I had. And what I found was when I tried to rush it, when I tried to rush the recovery and I tried to rush to the next phase, I felt burnt out because my body was asking for me to continually recover and to learn from the mistakes I had made. And a mistake to me is just making a choice that we realize wasn't the best one for us. We make mistakes all the time, and there's nothing wrong with that. I really believe that I grow more from failure and I grow more from regret and mistakes because they're uncomfortable, so I don't want to repeat it. Then if I succeeded all the time, it's harder to learn from that. When we're uncomfortable, we don't want to repeat it, so it's like sticks a little harder, if that makes sense. But anyways, I only mention that because what I found was once I fully surrendered and was like, F it, what do you want, self? I was surprised with the answers that arose. I'm not going to share those right now because when you're at the beginning of creative projects, I find that it's keep them close to your heart. You don't have to share them yet. They're in the baby phase. You just want them to be for you, and you're allowed that. And other people's opinions can really, sting because when you're creative and you're creating, I feel like you got to be open. You're like open-hearted, and it's just, you're more vulnerable. So I'm in the phase where I'm just keeping those close to me. You guys will be the first to know anything that enters the world that I've created. But anyways, I had to fully allow myself the time that my body was requiring. It was super uncomfortable. But now I'm coming out the other side. And it's like, right, I did get here. I did get to something new. I just had to be patient. And that's a big part of burnout and getting the answers that we've talked about in this episode is that sometimes it just requires patience, rest, recovery, and being okay with that uncomfortable in between. But I promise you will not be in that in between forever. You will get the answers you seek. And the more intentional you are, the more that next chapter will begin on even footing, right? We talked about burnout means a crack in the house, a crack in the foundation. If you really allow yourself to get the answers you're seeking, then that next step will be on steady foundation and you'll be able to walk and then run rather than walk and trip and fall and feel burnt out again. I hope that makes sense. I hope something in this episode was helpful. Thank you so much for this question. I'm sending you so much love. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of New View Advice. As always, I am so grateful to have these conversations each week. I forgot to mention in this episode, so I'll mention it here, that I actually created a playlist of music for this episode that's called Choosing a New View. I had fun creating this playlist. It's all songs about keep going forward, hope, going your own way, following your heart, which I actually am realizing I didn't even mention following your heart in this episode. But I really believe that this episode's all about following your heart. It's about getting intentional, connecting back to yourself so you can follow your heart and listen to your heart. Might have to do a follow-up episode. Anyways, I created a playlist. I'll link it in the show notes, but I want to mention that here in case anybody's interested in some music to go along with their reflecting phase, because I think sometimes music can also help us to relax. Depends on the kind of music. Don't get me started on that. But I think this playlist is pretty relaxing, pretty dance worthy. Sometimes moving our body can help us get answers too. Anyways, I was throwing way too much information here, so we're just gonna wrap this episode up. So thank you again for joining me for another episode. I hope I was able to offer you a new view on whatever you're going through. Sending you all my love. See you next time.